only I could make him understand. I just don't see things the way he does. I don't see how a world that makes such wonderful things could be bad.
Look at this stuff. Isn't it neat? Wouldn't you think?
Sapphire Steel is complete.
Wouldn't you think I'm the girl who has everything? I've got gadgets and gizmos aplenty. I've got who's its and what's its galore. You want
Steel songs?
I got 20. But who cares? No big deal. I want more.
All right, welcome guys. This is Malferon here with another deck profile for you. And this is what I'm actually very excited about. This has been my main deck for the Whispers in the Well set 10 in Disney Lorcana. And I have gone ahead and called it Sonic Boom in commemoration of Ariel Sonic Warrior, who's become one of my favorite cards. She's always been kind of one I've really enjoyed, but I think the set really has allowed her to flourish. And so there's a lot to cover in this video. If you are new, right, and you may not have seen my videos, they tend to go a little long. They're pretty in-depth analyses. I would highly encourage anyone who's wanting to explore a deck like this, an Ariel Blue Steel Sonic Warrior deck, or really wanting to improve at Blue Steel in general, to really watch the whole thing. I would highly encourage that. There's a lot of high yield information and breakdowns in this. But if you are mostly interested in the deck list itself, or even just a few tech slot swaps, I have all of that information laid out in chapters for you that you can just click around and then navigate at your own convenience. So just look around down at the YouTube bar or look in the description for those chapters and you can find those things. But I really think you'll get a high amount of value if you stick around for the whole video, especially the Mulligan and playline sections and the theory sections. I think these are concepts and things you really need to solidify to have good success with a deck that I think can beat basically anything. And so another thing is, most people that watch the videos are not subscribed still, so I would highly recommend, even if you like what I'm doing and the content here on this channel and what we're trying to do, which is to bring great Lorcana content to people that are new and wanting to improve at the game, or even old school veterans, share the video, subscribe to the channel, and like the video. It helps everything out. So here we go. As I said, this is a long one, so buckle up, but it's going to be a good time. As always, we'd like to start our videos with an outline, and we're going to be hitting a lot in this video. So we're going to start off with an introduction. We're going to hit some of those featured cards that you're going to see in the deck list. There's going to be a section called Theory, because, a lot of how to play the deck is, you really have to think of things that are not very intuitive to how most decks are ran, and you kind of have to think many steps ahead, many turns ahead. And so I really wanted to kind of emphasize some sort of abstract concepts that I think when you start to digest those well, you can have a lot better success with a deck as complex as this. Deck building, right? How do you sort of put together an Ariel Sonic Warrior deck? The deck list itself, and then a few other deck lists that you can try out. If the primary deck list, mine, is a little bit intimidating, right? I tried to make versions that almost anyone could feel comfortable with. Tech slots, right? Now remember, tech is a type of card that is designed to fit a particular situation or matchup, right? So they're not always standard in most decks, but you may slip them in or take them out depending on the types of other matchups you plan to play against. The Mulligan, which again is the sculpting of the hand phase at the beginning of the game when you pick cards to send away back into the deck and to draw those cards in return to make an ideal first play. And so, going over what good and standard mulligans would look like, and we try to break those down into particular matchups. We're going to talk about what some of those matchups may look like, the ones that are good, the ones that are challenging, and go into a couple of those matchups with very specific play lines so you can kind of see how a game might play out and what you need to think about. And and then kind of give final thoughts. So here we go. So why Ariel, right? On top of the fact that she's one of the OG princesses, right? So, Ariel was featured in The Little Mermaid, one of my favorite movies, came out in, It's like 97, maybe something like that. Which really, actually, it was probably a little earlier, maybe like 93. So she kicked off the Renaissance period of Disney, which arguably like saved Disney animation, right? And so, so a lot of future Disney owes a lot to The Little Mermaid and Ariel here. So Ariel Sonic Warrior was actually released in set 4, Ursula's Return, and she was reprinted in set 9, Fabled. So she is legal and core constructed, which is the primary competitive format for Disney Lorcana for at least another like year and a half. So this is the enchanted version of hers that was released in set 4. Ariel Sonic Warrior has a pretty unmatched removal opportunity, right? And so she has an ability to where every time you play a song, you can pay 2 ink to deal 3 additional damage to chosen characters. This is not limited to 1 song per turn. And you can do this as much as you have ink. And if you have multiple Ariels, you can do this for every song for every Ariel, meaning if you sing 1 song, you can pay 2 ink to do 3 damage. You can pay 2 ink again for the other Ariel to do 3 damage. And so her opportunity to really unleash, like a rain of hailfire upon your opponent is pretty unmatched, in my opinion, if you know how to build around her and know how to utilize her. She's a consistent threat because of this, right? So as soon as she's on the board, she's a threat that never has to turn sideways. As long as you're able to continue to either exert to sing or even hard cast songs, you can turn every song into at least 2 songs, right? Because you're just squeaking out so much extra value. And so she really like extends what's in your deck far beyond the amount of card count that's actually in your deck, right? And so it's effectively doubling the value of every song. She has immensely strong base stats. So like for a 6 cost, she's inkable, which is phenomenal, but she has 8 willpower, 3 strength, and she quests for 2. Like she's arguably overstated, and she was printed back in set 4. And so the fact that she's retained this, and she's a Floodborn on top of all this, and she has very relevant tags, being a princess and a hero. There's so much loaded into this card that we really try to stretch that value as much as we can. She's got Princess Synergy, which is very relevant in set 10, and then she facilitates some of the most powerful high rolls that Sapphire Steel can execute, right? And so that's one of the kind of the disadvantages to Sapphire Steel with some of the other really strong decks in the active set 10 Whispers in the Well meta is that they don't have as much as a high roll. And what a high roll means is essentially like this perfect melding of cards that lines up in a series of turns that presents like an overwhelming an overwhelming series of turns, right? Like essentially if you get this, it's very hard for your opponent to ever come back, right? And so Sapphire Emerald, right, blue green has a very powerful high roll where if they're able to execute it, it's almost impossible to make a comeback from that. Same thing with like purple steel, etc. And so that's why these cards are on the top of the meta. So Sapphire Steel has never really had that to such a snowball effect, but I think Ariel introduces that opportunity. So why now, right? Why now? We talk about why Ariel is such a good card, but really, I mean, one could say, especially for people that have been with the game for a long time, like what's really held her back from kind of taking over and having a lot of presence, from when she was released back in set 4, and I started playing the game in set 4, actually, Ursula's Return. Set 5, 6, 7, 8, she really was played almost never, she was very rarely played in Amber Steel song decks, right? Which was a very potent part of the meta. But even within that deck, she was considered a very niche tech card that only some people would do, and they'd only maybe run like 2 of her at most. And so if you decided to play her, it was considered like a very unique thing. She was never really featured on Sapphire Steel, and there's a lot of like reasons for that held Ariel back, right? And so probably one of the biggest things that was holding Ariel back was the fact that to actually like enable her value, you have to establish her, right? So she's a 6 cost. So if you're not shifting her, right, because she shifts on 4 ink, shifting meaning that you can take a Floodborn version of a character, so like Ariel, and you can play her for a cheaper cost on a lower version of her, right? And so Amber had the best version of this. They had a 3 cost Ariel, who she was 2 3 costs for 1, spectacular singer from set 1. And when you play her, you can look at the top 4 cards of your deck. If there's a song, you put it in your hand, right? So she's very, very strong. And then the next turn, when you're at 4 ink, you could just shift, because the cost is 4, shift on top of her, right? And then immediately sing a song, right? So it just kind of made sense to have those be together. But almost, like that kind of like very powerful synergy wasn't really in any other color combo. And so she wasn't really featured in many other color combos. And playing her by herself was always kind of tricky because you don't have enough to sing a song with someone else and pay 2 to use her ability. So you're not really gaining value from her yet. The tricky thing is that if you wanted to continue to play like on curve, like in Sapphire Steel, like if you wanted to play another 6 cost character or a 7 cost character, you're still not able to use her ability because you have 7 ink the next turn. And then even if historically you had a Fishbone cooldown, which allowed you to ink an additional card from your hand, right? That means you've spent a whole turn prior establishing Fishbone. And so like the only character you have probably is Ariel, which leaves you very vulnerable to removal. So either you're playing her and it takes so long to actually play other things and have enough spare ink to utilize her ability, right? Which then just makes her so slow. And by the time she's able to gain her value, like either the board or the game has kind of, gone past to when you really needed her to be effective, or she just never got to do anything before she got removed, right? And so she was just very, very clunky from like when you'd play her and when you'd be able to actually to sing songs and gain value out of her ability. And then there were just better options for what she was able to do in regards to like, removal engines. The other thing that's really helped spike her and allowed her now to not only establish but also like gain continued advantage and ramp, and then allow the extra needed ink to do her ability in a way that makes sense, has been the new Cinderella Dream Come True, which is a Sapphire legendary from set 10, Whispers in the Well. We've talked about this card before. She is phenomenal, right? But she's actually truly facilitated an ideal high roll play line from playing Cinderella into Ariel. And then that leaves you with, at the end of that turn, 7 ink, and then you can ink to 8 ink, which means you can now play a high yield character, like a 6 cost character, like a 5 cost character, and still have enough spare ink to sing a song and use Ariel's ability to spend 2 ink to do additional 3 damage. And while doing that, you've been established bodies the whole time, right? You've played Cinderella, you've played Ariel, so you have singers to sing, and so it all lines up pretty perfectly for Ariel to shine. Another thing historically that really held Ariel back was that she basically never got to stick on the board. So not only did you spend a lot of ink and spend a whole turn establishing her, she suffered what was historically known as the Medusa problem, right? So this was a card, Madame Medusa, the boss, released in set 3, which was very, very common in the meta for a long time, especially in red purple, right? And so, or ruby amethyst. Now, red purple used a lot of cards that would return cards back to hand, Merlin cards, Madame Mim cards. And, this card basically checked almost any character that was 3 strength or less, which Ariel's 3 strength, 8 willpower. And because as soon as you play her, you just banish them, right? And then you could recycle her by bouncing her back to the hand. And so there became a really big bias against especially expensive characters that had 3 strength or less, because they could just simply be removed by an opponent playing a Madame Medusa for immense value, and then they could just recycle her to keep doing it, right? And so not only was Ariel taking so long to even gain value, you'd play her and she would just get removed like the same turn, turn after, and it just felt really rough, right? And so she suffered from the Medusa. A lot of very interesting characters basically never got to see relevant play because this character existed in the meta. But so when she got rotated out, a lot of things got, were revisited. Another thing that Ariel suffered from is that a lot of her ability to stay safe is the fact that her willpower is so high, right? So she has 8 willpower. Again, she's arguably overstated for a 6 cost with how much is in her. And so she really suffered from the fact that how prominent like strong relevant board wipes were at that time in the meta. And so Be Prepared being, the champion of that, right? And so her willpower is irrelevant if she just gets removed instantly. So again, like you could spend a turn playing this and the next turn they could just play Be Prepared and kind of lose your whole turn, then you gain no value. And so with Be Prepared being rotated out when set 9 got released, it really allowed Ariel the opportunity to shine again. The other reason we didn't really see Ariel in set 9 Fabled, and why we're seeing her again, given a real opportunity in set 10, is because there just wasn't enough relevant songs in set 9, not for Sapphire Steel anyway. But with set 10, Whispers in the Well, we got 2 very good, very relevant songs that then reintroduces the opportunity for Ariel Sonic Warrior to sign. That was He Hurled His Thunderbolt, which is a very strong single-targeted removal spell that is kind of like in lieu of the old Then Along Came Zeus, which did 5 damage for 4 cost uninkable. This is 4 damage. And then the 1 cost, but I'm much faster, right? So these are so Strength of Raging Fire was reprinted to be legal in set 9, Fabled, but it just wasn't enough, right? And so these really now make a very strong argument that this is adequate ammunition to field Ariel Sonic Warrior. So let's talk about songs, right? So you can't talk about Ariel Sonic Warrior without talking about songs, right? So she is an artillery expert, right? All she does is unleash bombs and damage upon your opponent, but you need proper ammunition to fuel her armory, right? And so these are all the songs in Sapphire Steel that have been made since the beginning of the game, right? Now, of course, this video is largely relevant for Core Constructed. You can very much make an Ariel Sonic Warrior Infinity build. Her weaknesses become much more apparent in Infinity, right? Suffering from those like really easy board wipes and like cards I can instantly remove her simply by playing them. And so, so this video is going to be mostly targeted to the Core Constructed population. So we're going to black out all the cards that have been rotated out, right? So these are cards that were sets 1 through 4. They've been rotated out. They're gone. A lot of them are awesome cards, right? A Whole New World, Grab Your Swords. But, for the sake of the rest of the video, we're not going to consider them. Now, there were more cards that were rotated out, but that were reprinted in set 9. So they are legal again, right? So those in yellow were reprinted. Now, a lot of these cards are kind of niche, not the most relevant, right? So Find My Platinum banishes all items, right? That's nice. It's nice that that exists. It's not going to be a super prominent card. 4 Dozen Eggs gives everyone resist 2 until the start of the next turn. It's interesting, but it's just not enough value to justify putting, especially multiple copies in your deck. 1 Jump Ahead, gives you an additional ink off the top of your deck. It is uninkable, which definitely works against, and putting it as an easy slot into the deck. Regardless of how it may help with the consistency. And later in the game, it's just a card that feels really bad to draw. One Last Hope is actually pretty interesting. It's a 3 cost uninkable that allows you to give a character resist 2 to the start of your next turn. And if they're a hero character and you target a hero character, they can challenge rated characters. So it's kind of like a mini Arthur. It's a little clunkier, and you kind of have to have a hero to really gain that big benefit. And so it's hard to always easily slip this in. And then we have the really big songs, dig a little deeper into Mob Song, and we'll talk more about these, notably Mob Song later. The red card, the cards in red are going to be the very relevant songs that you should be seeing in most song builds, and that we'll talk about more as the video goes on, right? So Strength of Raging Fire, He Hurled His Thunderbolt, But I'm Much Faster and Beyond the Horizon. These are your core songs, your core steel songs that are going to be the heart of an Ariel Sonic Warrior build. So let's talk about shift targets in Sapphire Steel. This is basically all we have, right? So again, this is another reason why Ariel Sonic Warrior was largely overlooked in Sapphire Steel. And in fact, when we consider what's now legal for play, right? So what's been rotated out due to being core constructed, right? These 2 are gone. So there is 1 shift target available to us, and she's a pretty bad card. Ariel Determined Mermaid is it's just not good, right? For what Sapphire Steel wants to do. She's 3 costs, and most games we're just skipping turn 3, right? Because of how we ramp or like to ramp. Again, ramp means playing cards that allow you to ink an additional time. So we're really skipping a lot of ink counts and jumping ahead in the game to facilitate what the deck wants to do. And then, and her ability, when you play a song, you draw a card, discard a card, just is almost never relevant. And so it's hard for her to justify being a spot in the deck. And so it's just, you just kind of assume if you're going to play Sonic Warrior, you're not going to be shifting. And hopefully one day we get a Sapphire or Steel Ariel that is a better shift target, but we don't have one quite yet. So let's talk about the feature cards that you will be seeing in the deck list, right? So we have our core early stage cards, right? And so Mulan is the 1-drop that I've chosen for this deck. I did run Captain Hook for a little while. I feel like in the overall game plan of what the deck wants to do, Mulan has a little bit more relevancy, right? So she, when you play her, first off, she's a inkable 1-drop princess, right? She has 2 strength, 1 willpower, and when you play her, you may draw a card and discard a card. So she helps filter a little bit. She's a princess trigger, which is very relevant for Cinderella Dream Come True. And, she swings for 2, so she's a reasonable threat for most 1 and even some 2-cost characters. So we have the heart of any Sapphire deck, which is your turn 2 ramp. Again, ramp being cards at ink additional times. So as I continue to use that term throughout the video, I'm very much largely referring to Tipo, Sail, and then the later ramp cards being Cinderella and Kita. Now, Tipo is and Sail, their whole purpose is designed when you have 2 ink, you are catapulting to 3 so that you can play a 4 ink card on your next turn, on your turn 3, instead of a 3 ink card. And those 4 ink cards are ideally one of these two. In most situations, you want it to be Cinderella, but Kita does have very relevant moments, and she's sort of a backup plan as well. And so Cinderella is, again, one of the beating hearts of the deck. At the end of your turn, if you played a princess, meaning it's the same turn you play her, you can put a card from your hand into the inkwell, and then at the end of turn, you're drawing a card as well, right? So basically, she's giving you free ink. She's keeping the same hand size, but you're gaining a free resource. Free meaning that like you do have to give up a card for it, but she allows you to kind of break those inking rules, which is awesome. And she can also dump uninkables with that ability as well, which is immensely powerful. And then Kita, she's a little slower, right? So she's inkable, which is nice. She's a ward, which is really great. So she's really hard to get rid of conveniently. And then when you exert her, you can look at the top 2 cards, put one into your inkwell exerted, the other you keep on top. So she really allows you to kind of pick your next turn. She continues to grow your inkwell, and she's just very annoying to get rid of. So Kita's a great card, but Cinderella's the ideal card. So this is the next part of the game, which I call the stability stage, right? So this is the stage where, so the early game, you're really wanting to ramp, basically, and catapult your ink count so you can get to these bigger bodies. Now, because you're ramping, you're deploying, on average, less characters that are strong to fight for the board. So the opponent may be questing more, the opponent may be having more stronger characters that are like lower cost. And so this stage, when you get to like the 5-6 ink count, is what I call the stability stage, because this is when you think about, okay, I need to start getting the board back, right? I need to stabilize and not lose too much control. And these are the cards that are very relevant for that, right? So of course we have Ariel Sonic Warrior, who's the other, the other half of the beating heart of this deck, and is usually your ideal next turn play after a Cinderella dream come true. Whenever you play a song, you pay 2 ink, you deal 3 damage to a chosen character. Very, very powerful, right? We'll talk more about that. Tinkerbell, which has been essentially like a staple card, staple meaning like a key card that will almost always be there. A staple card in Sapphire Steel since set 1, right, since the beginning of the game. She's just a very loaded 6-drop, right? She's inkable, she has 4 strength, which is very powerful, 5 willpower. She quests for 2, right? So she can start questing if she's not doing anything else. And then when you play her, you just deal 1 damage to everything on your opponent's field, right? So she splashes damage, and whenever she banishes a character, you can ping 2 damage onto another character. So she just kind of is like the ultimate bully on the board, and it feels great. Namari, 5-cost card, really interesting legendary from set 8. When you play her, you can draw a card and then discard a card, and you can do that at the beginning of each of your turns. And her strength is as high as the cards in your discard. I've had games where she's been at 20 strength. It's actually quite comical. So she kind of reaches a point where she's just this relentless battering ram. So she can pop any location, she can get over any body, and then challenging her becomes very awkward, because if they can't banish her with just 1 character, almost everything kind of dies in the process of trying to get rid of her, and that feels pretty good, right? Pluto, really convenient ways to get rid of items, right? When you play more steel characters, you pop items, and all your other steel characters gain a new ability where if they banish a character, you gain 2 lore, which is awesome. It's just a very well-statted 5-drop. And then Lady Cluck, which definitely is a little bit of a spice card, but I think this is a very powerful 5-cost that can kind of make games extremely awkward for your opponents, and is a setup for one of the ideal lines you'll be considering. So bodyguard being that she can protect, and ward being that like they have to deal with her in challenges, they cannot remove her selectively. Then you have kind of your end game 7-drop bombs. I've talked about this before in my Sapphire Steel video. So you want to play Sapphire Steel, which I'd recommend checking that out if you haven't. But these are these very powerful end game cards that close games and are strong forms of removal. They are kind of a little bit of backup dancers to Ariel, to be totally honest, but in tandem together, right? They work to make an extremely powerful and overwhelming late game. Vincenzo is at 2 8 quests for 3, right? So he's very well statted. And when you play him, you just do 3 damage, right? And so ideally he gets rid of something and then you start questing for a whole bunch and they just have to deal with him. Hades, again, you play him, right? You ink a character. You just delete something off the board. Get him out of here, right? And then and he quests for 2. And then Arthur, when you play him, you give a character +2 challenger, +2 resist, and they can challenge rated characters this turn. Very strong, right? And allows you to get past ward, right? So if they have a character that they've been keeping readied and they're not turning sideways, not exerting, and you want to get rid of that character and you can't select them with songs, which is kind of what most of this deck's removal is, you can play Arthur. You can give one of your characters the ability to hit a readied character and then you get rid of them that way. So Arthur really is kind of like a key tech card on getting around some strange boards. And then you have the reprisal stage. Now, the reprisal stage is basically the stage where you make your comeback. This is the counterattack stage, right? And so this is when you deploy Goliath, which is one of our new steel legendaries we got in set 10, is a very crucial part of the deck, is a core draw engine, right? At the end of each player's turn, while he's on the board, you must end with 2. Meaning, if you have 0 cards in hand, you draw 2. And if you have 5 cards in hand, you discard down to 2, right? So it really incentivizes you to keep emptying your hand, so you keep refilling with 2, which feels pretty good. And then your plethora of songs, right, to keep fighting for the board, right? So Strength of Raging Fire, deal 3 damage to chosen character, character equal to the number of characters you have in play. So you can do 1 damage, you can do 5. So this is way better later in the game, right? It's not as strong early. So you mostly want to see this later. Early in the game, it's usually inked. Hero does Thunderbolt, really strong, just static 4 damage, right? And in the current meta, 4 damage is very relevant. There's a lot of high yield 4 willpower characters, and you use this card as a very, the heart of a lot of your control. But I'm much faster. This is a new card from set 10 as well. Same with Hero does Thunderbolt. It's a 1-cost inkable song, which is really interesting because that means you could sing this with Mulan, your 1-cost. You could sing this with your 2-cost Tipo. Usually they don't get to do any cool singing like that, so now they're part of the choir. And it gives a character Alert, which is a new tag in set 10, which Alert allows a character to challenge as if they were evasive, and Challenger 2. So now this gives you a new tool to fight against evasive characters, and still enable aerial triggers because it's a song. So it allows for really cool, efficient trades against evasives, which are a really big part of the meta. Down in New Orleans, I love this card. This is a card that a lot of people say is bad, and in the wrong moments, they're not wrong. This is a very risky card. It's a card that kind of banks on a high roll and is it's luck. It's pure luck, right? You look at the top 3 cards. If there's a character, item, or location that's 6 cost or less, you play it for free. Now there are definitely moments, because this deck runs 8 7-drops, right, and runs 17 songs. There are definitely moments where you play Dino, right, down in New Orleans, or Dino is what I'm going to call it for most of the video, and it hits nothing, and you get no value from it, other than maybe you sang it with Ariel and you get to pay 2, now do 3 damage. However, there have been more games than I can count, because this deck also runs 12 6-drops, and it runs 6 5-drops, and actually some really relevant 4-drops. There's usually, especially if you're kind of watching what cards you've been getting and what cards you've been inking, and you kind of like, I haven't seen any Tinkerbells yet, right? And so she's a 6-cost, so surely I should be seeing one soon. Way more times than I can count. This card has completely won me the game because it swings the amount of characters on the board. Either restabilizes it or pushes it way in your favor. I mean, you're just spitting out a free 6-cost character. And if it's a Goliath or a Tinkerbell or an Ariel, that is so overwhelming to the opponent and hard to deal with. Beyond the Horizon, this is a secondary draw engine, right? It's a sing together. You can choose if both players will discard or draw. So it's a great way to punish opponents' hands and a great way to refill your hand that you can sing with your 7-cost cards. Or like sing together with like a Cinderella, like 2 Cinderellas, or like a Cinderella and one of your 6-drops or something like that. It's a little clunky, but if you get used to using it, it's very, very valuable, right? It helps to continue the refilling the hand so you can keep deploying songs. And again, it's an aerial trigger. And then Mob Song. So this is a card that, again, pretty high risk, right? 10 cost uninkable, so it runs the risk of being stuck in your hand. But the deck actually plays it pretty smoothly and has a way to completely swing games that no other card in Sapphire Steel can, right? And so do 3 damage up to 3 characters, and you can ideally trigger an aerial trigger on top of it. So I've done 15 damage in one turn with this card because of 2 aerials on the board, and no other card can kind of do what it does. And so we are considering one Mob Song. So let's talk about theory, right? Let's talk about like what are like unique concepts and things you have to consider when you're playing an Ariel build, right? And so the first thing is removal thresholds. You really have to have a pretty strong understanding of, what are the willpower counts that you're going to be seeing coming up in the matchup you're seeing. So, Ariel Sonic Warrior builds like Sonic Boom really benefit a lot from you having a strong knowledge of your opponent's decks, right? Now, this sounds intimidating, right? But this is why the video exists, to try to help, provide that information for you. But really, like, the best way is to kind of just play a lot of games against a lot of different colors and try to understand what are the threats you consistently see. Singers and songs, right? So a deck that's very focused on singers, so people that played Amber Steel, Steel Song decks will be very familiar with this concept of, you kind of live and die by your singers and songs. And so keeping characters alive to continue to be singers is a very is a skill you need to get used to, right? And so there's many times where you'll be tempted to, like, oh, I'm going to quest here, I'm going to challenge here, but it may actually have just been better to keep certain characters up because you needed to maintain a singer, right? And so yeah, we'll talk about that a little bit. Goliath triggers and ink utilization. I think this is one of the hardest things to sort of wrap your head around. But with the introduction of Goliath, clan leader, as a core draw engine in the deck, optimizing his value of really always trying to maximize your refill with Goliath, and sort of knowing like what that means in regards to combining that with Ariel triggers and cards you can play to the board, right? Characters you can deploy. I think is like a big thing you have to like start thinking about, and it kind of changes what you decide to ink, what you decide to keep in your hand, and how you want to build your turns to maximize all your value. And then hand economy and filtering, right? This is a deck that really, does a lot of like, picking and choosing as you're kind of getting cards and finding cards that kind of filter, meaning that like, you dump a card and then you find another card. So you're trading cards a lot to continue to find what you need for particular situations. This is kind of like a high skill thing, really. Like, it looks simple, but when you decide to ink a certain card to hopefully look for another option, does take a lot of like practice to kind of like get used to that. But we'll cover some basic concepts. So let's talk about removal thresholds and efficiency setups, right? And so these are your two major characters that will be essentially forcing a lot of math on you, right? So Tinkerbell, when she's played, right, you do 1 damage to all characters on your opponent's board. And then Ariel, right, her trigger is 3 damage every time you sing a song. So really kind of understanding, which character is more valuable at particular moments, right? When do I ink a character to play the other? When do I want to really try to keep both? When I'm looking for like another answer, right? Like when I'm trying to refill my hand or whatever, when I'm looking for another character, which one am I looking for? Because which one is the value that I need to address the willpower counts on my opponent's board? It may seem like you always want an Ariel or you always want a Tinkerbell, but sometimes the math really checks out to where you have to think about either both or the other one instead of the other, right? So these are like your relevant removal thresholds that you need to think about in regards to having these characters play together, but also like which one is more priority. So, 1 willpower, right? Very, very prominent in the meta. You'll see a lot of like, so Sapphire Steel and Purple Steel will be playing Mulan. Mulan's not like super common in Purple Steel, but is definitely there. Another one in Purple Steel you'll see, and sometimes in Blurple or Sapphire Amethyst, is Olaf, right? So Olaf is he's 2 strength, 1 willpower as well. So Cursed Merfolk is a really good kind of like questing character, right? And aggro meaning like you want to quest aggressively. So a deck that wants to finish the game fast, that you'll see in green purple a lot, right? Elanwi, who you'll see in many like blue yellow decks, and then amber steel decks, right? So and then Tinkerbell, which you'll see in like ruby amethyst. So these are cards that like by just simply playing a Tinkerbell, right, they're gone, right? So you just play her, she does 1 damage, they disappear. So if you see a deck that's deploying these, or a color combo that will want to deploy these, right, you hold your Tinkerbell, you keep your Tinkerbell, right? She's valuable, right? Simply by playing her, you're going to gain massive value. So that's something you have to think about. So 3 costs right? So this is a very common willpower threshold. So Calhoun technically is a 2 willpower. I'm putting her here because she's spiritually a 3 willpower in regards to how you get rid of her, really, because she has resist 1, and so it takes 3 damage to banish her in one go. And we will almost never want to be in a situation where we're hitting her with 2 characters with 2 strength each. That's just, if you're doing that, you're just doing something wrong. And so I put her here, because that's how it normally lines up. But some very relevant 3 willpower characters you'll see: Lady, Diablo, Dumbo. Dumbo's going to be in almost every purple deck you're going to see. And then Calhoun, which will be in almost every purple steel deck, especially Diablo and Ruby Amethyst, red purple, and then clearly, yellow green for Lady. This is where you really want to see Ariel. This is where like every Ariel trigger, right? Every time you sing a song and you activate her ability, one of these dies, right? It's gone, banished, boom. Off to the graveyard, hasta luego, light the funeral pyre. Once they see Ariel, like you just know that their heart drops, because most people know that it is very rare for these characters to ever survive the turn after they're played, which completely changes the pace of the game. 4 willpower is tricky. 4 willpower is hard, and has actually been one of the major stress points for Sapphire Steel even since set 9. But especially since even as far back as set 5. Like when Daisy Deck was introduced, it was really clunky to get rid of her, right? But back then, we had really strong cards, like then along came Zeus and stuff like that. And set 9, a lot of our really good removal disappeared. And we didn't have good ways to deal with 4 willpower. Like even think to our 7 cost, like Vincenzo does 3 damage on play. Tinkerbell does 1 damage on play. Yeah, you can sing strength, but it's actually kind of hard to get it to 4 cost early enough, or 4 cards early enough to do 4 damage. And so it actually became, 4 willpower was actually very challenging for Sapphire Steel to deal with for quite a few months. And so, and this is one of the people's biggest arguments against Ariel. It's like, oh, she does 3, right? But 4 is kind of like the cutoff you have to be able to address, right? You have to be able to deal with 4 willpower characters. And if you can't do that, then you're not even worth considering. So some people dropped Ariel because of this. To me, I think that's short-sighted, right? So this is where you really want to think of Ariel and Tinkerbell working as a team, right? And this is where cards like Dino down in New Orleans are very, very cool, where you could, and this has happened many times, where with Ariel seeing Dino, I'll spit out a free Tinkerbell. She does 1 damage to everything. Now everything's lined up to be banished by Ariel's ability. And then you kind of just keep the train rolling, right? And so the other thing that really helped with 4 willpower characters is that we have He Hurled His Thunderbolt now, which is that 4 cost uninkable song, which does 4 damage. And so now we actually have a pretty solid efficient answer to these very powerful cards. These are cards you're going to see very commonly. Daisy Duck's a little less common, but she's still the most powerful early Amber character. Genie is going to be in every purple deck, right? He's 4 willpower. He's got evasive. He draws a card. He's just so good. Quest for 2. And then Cheshire Cat is the other very common purple card you're going to see that just really snowballs games, and you kind of have to have an answer for him, or you're just going to always lose the board. And then Lexington, right? Really good card that came out in set 10 as well. Cheshire Cat and Lexington came out in set 10. 4 willpower, 4 strength, has alert, right? Helps deal with evasives, and you'll see him a lot in Sapphire Steel Allies decks and then Purple Steel decks as well. And the 6 willpower is kind of the next cutoff. And I know a lot of people don't really think about 6 willpower. People hope to bank on using their Hadeses and stuff. But again, Hades is kind of a clunky card, right? Hades if you're playing Hades, he kind of takes up your whole turn, which is not very ideal. If you're playing Hades and he takes up your whole turn, you may not be using Ariel triggers, so you're getting less optimization. And you're also giving your opponent ink, which, sometimes it's well, who cares, right? But actually there's many games where it's very relevant of giving your opponent ink. So if you can get away with not using a Hades to get rid of these cards, you try to. Sometimes the value is too good. Hades is, just get rid of a card, and sometimes you just have to do that. But Ariel can easily get over these cards. By the time these cards are being deployed, your Strength of a Raging Fires will probably be hitting for at least 3, which means, you combine that with an Ariel trigger, you're 3+3, you're getting rid of a 6 willpower character, right? You play a Vincenzo, you sing a song, and then you activate Ariel's ability. Vincenzo does 3, her trigger does 3, you do 6 damage, right? So Ariel combined with a lot of the rest of the deck, 6 willpower is actually another threshold point where she easily checks and deals with, as long as you're appropriately planning for it. So these are kind of the things that you have to think about when you're holding cards, holding removal, thinking about what they're going to be playing, what those willpowers will be, and when you decide to burn your your ammunition, right? And so and how you want to do that, and the ink you need to use aerial triggers appropriately to reach all these thresholds. So singers and songs, right? So this section isn't too long, but again, like it's the concept of you really want to, in general, sculpt a hand and make it a ramping plan, right? So when you're like ramping on turn 2 and playing Cinderella on turn 3, etc. Like what is the card that you want to end on with turn 6, right? You really have to be planning that far ahead. Usually it's Ariel. But you also want to be thinking about like, what is a card that will hopefully survive, right? Like if they play something to annihilate your singers, because they'll recognize very soon that you're a singing deck, and they know that they need to prioritize really getting rid of characters that have the willpower to sing relevant songs, which is basically usually the cost, right? Usually they want to get rid of anything 4 cost or above to stop thunderbolts, right? And so so you want to think about like, what does it look like to establish those safe singers, especially when you get to 6 ink. Things you have to kind of plan for, right? Whenever a singer sings, almost plan that they may get that one song, so you better make it worth it, right? And if they get away with singing and survive, that's awesome. But usually opponents will take every opportunity as soon as one of your singers is exerted to get rid of that singer as fast as possible. Always have a backup plan if your singer that you were banking on gets banished before you get to sing with them. I think this is something that you just have to have preparation for, because most skilled players will be knowing what you're trying to do, and they will have a plan to get rid of your singer, especially if they're on the play. And so don't formulate a hand that puts everything into like, I need this one singer on turn 4 to survive, and if I don't, I just lose, right? Then you've already lost already. So you really have to kind of think about what that backup plan looks like to set up that backup singer, or make it to where maybe you put out a bait singer that would get removed, and your real singer you're depending on is the card you're going to play next, things like that. And then whenever possible, you want to prioritize squeaking out aerial triggers. Maybe if that makes like a slightly less optimal play from like playing another big body or something, because again, like a lot of the deck's value and the way it beats other decks is just simply every card turns into 2 cards because of aerial triggers. And so you want to think about like, well, how do you change your mindset to prioritize aerial triggers? Don't do this foolishly, right? But sometimes the obvious play isn't to use the aerial trigger, and just kind of exercise your brain to get more used to that. So Goliath triggers and ink utilization, right? And so when you play a character, So Goliath, right? Remember, at the end of each of your turn, you must end your turn with 2 cards, right? Meaning that if you played your whole hand and you have no cards in hand at the end of playing a turn when you have Goliath, you draw 2 cards, right? If you have 2 cards in hand, you draw nothing. If you have 1 card in hand, you draw 1. Now, if you draw nothing, it's not terrible, but you're really like limiting the value that Goliath's giving you, right? He wants to give you cards. So you want to give him opportunities to do cards, which means a near perfect Goliath trigger utilization is that you want to set up the cards in your hand to where you are playing a character, you're singing a song. Ideally, you have remaining ink to do an aerial trigger. And then maybe you do a Cinderella trigger, right? You ink a card, you play a card. But when you're thinking about cards in your hand, you want to set it up to where you are able to ink one of them, able to play one of them, and then able to sing something to where you empty your hand almost every time. You're drawing 2 more cards, you reload, right? Now, this isn't true for every situation, but this is like the general kind of like rhythm you want to get used to, right? Sometimes like, if you're winning the game, or if you like know major threats are coming and you have 2 really strong songs and you have Ariel on board, sometimes you just keep the songs, right? You don't need to waste them. You don't need to ink one of them, right? You just hold on to them, right? But I'm saying in general, this is kind of the rhythm you want to maintain. And you want to like prioritize ensuring that you're like, using turns to keep removing the opponent's board, because they're also getting benefit off Goliath draws. And so you want to worsen their benefit, right? By constantly staying ahead on the board. So, if you had like, if you're in a situation where your only singer that you have extra is Vincenzo and you want to quest, sometimes the decision is to sing with him to keep their board empty, knowing he can quest the turn after, even though he's going to quest for 3. Right? It feels bad, but sometimes that's what you got to do to really optimize your Goliath and then keep that rhythm going. So let's kind of like give some examples of what that might look like with Goliath triggers and ink utilization, right? So let's say you played Goliath and you're at 6 ink, right? And so you played him exactly at 6 ink, which means next turn, right? The ideal play that you maybe want to do is you ink a card, you sing maybe with your Cinderella or your Goliath a bolt, right? Thunderbolt, and then you play Vincenzo, right? You've used all your ink, your hand is not empty, you draw 2 cards, you've done tons of damage to the board, and then now you're at 7 ink, right? What could a turn like this look like? You ink a card, you're now at 8 ink, right? You play an Ariel, you use Goliath to sing down in New Orleans, maybe you get a free Tinkerbell, who knows? Maybe you get another Ariel, maybe you get a Namari, and now you have 2 remaining ink because you paid 6 to play the Ariel, and you use that 2 remaining ink, you sing a song, to do an Ariel trigger, you do an extra 3 damage, right? Beautiful turn, your hand is empty, you go again, right? Now this turn, you ink to 9, you play a 7 cost, maybe you sing together Mob Song, you do 9 damage, and then you have 2 remaining ink, so you have 2 more for an Ariel trigger, you use that 2 ink, right? Bada boom, you do another 3 damage with Ariel. So this is kind of like the thought process and examples of what this would look like. Don't forget, thank you Cinderella, when you play a princess, you choose the order of end of turn triggers. So remember, Goliath's draw is at the end of turn. So is Cinderella's trigger when you, like, if you played a princess, you can ink a card to draw a card. Meaning you get to choose the order with how this game works of when those cards take effect. So if you have no cards in hand, that means you can't do Cinderella's effect. However, if you do Goliath's effect first, you draw 2 cards, then you can do Cinderella's effect, ink one of them to draw another card, continue your ink gain, right? So that's something to keep in mind and to not forget. And then hand economy and filtering, right? So keep at least 1 song and character in general as you're kind of like filtering through your hand, maybe using Namari triggers, Mulan triggers, Cinderella triggers, etc. If you like only have maybe 1 or 2 Cinderellas and you're playing princesses to like ink draw, right? If you're in that situation, you want to basically keep doing that until you find like a draw source, right? Until you find a Goliath, until you find a Beyond the Horizon. And you almost, in those situations, you're often forced to keep dumping removal cards until you find that draw source, because this is a deck that you really cannot put yourself in a situation where you're top decking in this deck. This deck doesn't tolerate that very well, or it's not really designed to work like that, and it's really designed to never be in that situation, right? And so sometimes it happens, and it is what it is. And Sapphire Steel actually still does pretty good in those situations. But if you can help it, you try to maintain your hand and don't try to put yourself in a top deck situation. And then if you've stabilized, you only filter songs as a last resort, otherwise you hold on to them. So deck building, right? So the easy way to kind of think about, well, how many Ariels do I want in my deck, right? If you have like 9 to 11 songs, 2 Ariels is fine. Ariel's kind of like, she's a part of your build. She's not core to your build. If you're running like 12 to 14 songs, then you kind of are an Ariel build. She is she's an important part of your removal engine, right? And so you can start considering like more spice cards, like Mob Song, things like that. Otherwise, continue with a good count of your core songs. When you start to get to like, if you want to do like Ariel is a core to my build. Ariel is a major thing I play around, right? You run 4, and then you think about 15 to 17 songs to really justify that Ariel count. So this is the deck list, right? Like 40 minutes in. And so Sonic Boom, right? It's spent a long time getting here. So first off, right, you'll notice that I'm only running 3 1-drops. So Mulan is I'm only running 3, and really, the ideal turn 1 play in almost every scenario is to just ink and pass, right? You really want to maintain that hand to when you get to Cinderella, catapulting into your late game and keep filter drawing with her ability to like establish the ink and the bodies to start enabling Ariel triggers. And so you want to keep your hand pretty healthy. If you can prevent playing things to the board, shrinking your hand size by 1, you want to. Now, Mulan does play a key role in that, like, she's a princess. So later in the game, she's another Cinderella trigger. She filters, right? So, if you have a just horrible hand with a bunch of uninkables, you can play her to try to fix that. And then, you know, if you have a hand where you didn't find turn 2 ramp, she can, again, try to filter and try to help salvage that as well. And if you're playing against aggro, she's still like, you know, if you want to play her turn 1 to help like fight against like purple steel or dogs, she still does like a reasonable job of doing that too. You know, usually you don't need that, right? So she, you know, that's why I chose her over Hook, that she has a lot more variability. You know, that's why she's only at 3 because, you know, again, I want to see her enough to where I see her when I want to see her, but I don't really want her in my opening hand every game, right? So you really think of like 4 of a card as something that you want to see in an opener hand, high enough to where it'd be part of a main line. And Mulan's not really that, right? Mulan is there to where like I hope to see her in a best of 3 or in like against decks I'd want to see her for. I don't really care if she's in my hand at the beginning of every game. Kita, right, is a backup follow-up ramp, right? So again, like Tipo and Sail is your turn 2. Turn 4 is almost always you want Cinderella, but Kita is there as a kind of a backup line, right? I used to run 3. 3 felt like I was seeing her a little too much to where I'd want to see like a more impactful card. 2's felt perfect. She's pretty strong, and that like she can also has a really like cool utility that she can, you know, you can look at your top card and you can like guarantee a Dino pull, right? Guarantee that 6-drop for Dino. You can set up what your Goliath is going to draw. You can keep setting up songs for your Ariel next turn. And she's just really hard to get rid of, and she's pretty good into Emerald Emerald matchups. So yeah, I really like Kita for that. My 5-drops I really think of as tech cards, right? So my 5-drops I kind of treat as like, these are cards designed to give my deck the legs and adaptability to handle different builds and different matchups. So they kind of like are, you know, the count of 2/2/2. So Lady Cluck helps deal with blue matchups, especially blue, green, and blurple. And you know, she does a great job of like, she can really eliminate go-go traps. What I mean by that is, so Go-Go Tamago is a 2-cost inkable emerald card where, you know, when you play her, you can pay 2 additional ink and you can gain the lore of the damage on a card. So what some like green builds will do, emerald builds, is they'll like, you know, you have Vincenzo who's massive. He's he has 8 willpower, but he also like doesn't kill many things when they attack him because he has 2 strength. So they can like put a bunch of damage on him, right? Get him up to 7 damage, play Go-Go, gain 7 lore. And so one way to kind of prevent that is Lady Cluck, who can be a bodyguard that kind of defends your guys from getting like all this like peppered damage on them. But also they can't do that to her because she's warded, right? So Go-Go can't target her. So Lady Cluck is actually a pretty good like, you know, bodyguard against blue, and then really frustrates green builds as well because she's warded. Namari is just a great filter engine. She's a princess. She triggers Cinderella. She looks for cards and gets rid of bad cards, right? Instead of drawing that Tipo, maybe you get rid of him and then, oh wow, you drew a Hero's Thunderbolt. Feels really nice. She's really good in that she gets very strong, and so she can deal with big steel characters and locations, and she's just a solid 5-drop in general. I used to run 3 of her, but I kind of liked the more stable spread of 5-drops, so she went down to 2. And then Pluto is really relevant for fighting against green-yellow dog builds, right? And so Emerald, Amber, like Lady in the Tramp builds, he helps to get rid of items like Emerald Chromacon and Amethyst Chromacon, and you know, allows you a different way to make a comeback by giving all your steel characters the ability to gain 2 lore when he challenges. So I kind of like this like spread of 5-drops to help deal with anything. And if I'm in a matchup, like if I'm in a blue matchup, I usually just ink Pluto. He's not very relevant. If I'm in like an aggro matchup like yellow green, I just usually like ink Namari or a Cluck for Pluto, depending on what the situation is, right? So the 7-drops. So, you know, I only run 3 Hades. Most people will run 4, and they'll stand by that pretty strongly. For me, like with Ariel kind of functions as like almost identical to like Hades' removal opportunities. And there's sometimes where the 7-cost uninkable is just clunky in the hand, especially when you're trying to do those like Goliath trigger and ink utilizations, right? And so I found that like 3 is a perfect. I kind of treat him as a specialist removal, right? I really hold Hades and Arthur for key targets that I would otherwise struggle to get rid of with Ariel. And so like, you know, Monstros, Prince Phillips, things like that. And then, you know, some of my specialist songs. So I run 17 songs, which feels like the right number for the build that I'm running. And then, again, like, so Dino and Mob Song definitely feel scary and intimidating. Like, oh, these cards are uninkable and they seem like really risky. I'm not saying you're wrong, but I will say that like, get familiar with them and you will win games that you never thought you could win. So here's another build. This build is focused a little bit more on consistency. So I called it like a standard Ariel 246. So it's not Sonic Boom, right? Sonic Boom has a lot more kind of like flavor to it and, flexibility to it. But this one, you should more consistently see and do the core of what you want to do, right? You want to establish your Ariels. You want to sing songs and do things, right? It keeps a lot of, it keeps the 4 Hadeses. It uses, develops, and one jump ahead to really try to make sure that you're not missing turn 2 ramp and more consistently finding the options you want. It doesn't have a lot of tech slots, right? So there's no Pluto, there's no Lady Cluck. So you're kind of just committing to like the core idea of the deck. But if you run into situations that the deck isn't really designed to deal with, it may have a little bit more harder time. So this is an Ariel supplemental build, right? So basically where Ariel is part of the plan, but she's not central to the plan. So there's only running 2 of them. We're doing a little bit, we're diversifying our princesses with 2 Jasmines, right? We're introducing some Plutos here. So this build's meant to like fight a little bit more, have ways to deal with different situations, but it's still a pretty consistent build. This is the Jasmine Allies version. I'd say Ariel is pretty uncommon in Allies in general, but Allies is, usually the most common Sapphire Steel build outside of like a typical 246 line. And so, I just wanted to kind of show what a build like that would look like. I'd say this would be probably the least common version of an Ariel build, but it's not that it couldn't work. And so let's talk about tech slots in Sonic Boom. So for your 1-drops, right, the obvious swap is Captain Hook. So Captain Hook allows you to do 3 damage with your 1 cost. I found that this was only really relevant in the yellow-green dogs and red-purple. It helps him, Captain Hook and red-purple, allowing him to get rid of a Hercules with just a 1-drop feels great. Getting rid of a Diablo, right? Turn 2 Diablo, a 3/3, that quests for 2. To help get rid of Palace Guard with Tipo. Like all of this felt really good. And these are things that Mulan can't really do. I felt, and then like against yellow green, right, he can get rid of like ladies. He can, work with a Tipo to get rid of Daisy Duck. But I kind of felt that like the situations where I really wanted him or needed him, became like fewer and fewer and fewer. And then he was oftentimes just being ink. And when I wanted a 1-drop, I really wanted it to be something that would kind of do anything else other than just challenge. And Mulan kind of fulfills that role. So, for how greedy and top end the build wants to be, I found Mulan to be more beneficial overall. But again, you could also consider develop your brain to improve your filtering, help you find that turn 2 ramp, and also just in the later game, helping to find better options and digging a couple cards deeper. I found that if you get familiar with the deck and getting used to like optimizing Goliath triggers and Cindy triggers, that I didn't really need the develop your brain filtering. It kind of does a lot of inherent filtering in the build. But develop your brain's never a bad card. So, another thing you could consider is swapping out the Kitas and just dropping Kita. There's definitely builds that have done that where you only rely on Cinderella. Or you could like, if your meta has a lot of like aggro builds, like builds that are going to quest very aggressively, to slip in a couple of Pleakleys. Pleakley allows you to fight for the board a little bit better, right? Being 3/4, but allows you to keep inking while you do that. So he's a little faster than Kita technically, in regards to like getting to a 6-drop or a 7-drop. With the amount of ink he's putting in, he does kind of rely on, inking something, right? So you kind of had to have played Tipo or Mulan beforehand. And, the build just doesn't run enough 1-drops to really justify Pleakley being consistent. And, I found Kita as overall more beneficial. So now for the 5-drops, really, you can just kind of play with the numbers, right? Kind of what you expect in your area. You could just drop Cluck and go to like 4 Namaris, 2 Plutos. You could just do like 1 Pluto if you're not expecting many dogs, but maybe 1 guy in your area plays them, and then do like 3 Namari, 2 Cluck. You could swap out Cluck for Scuttle if you want just a big battering ram of a ward character instead of a bodyguard. So really, you kind of just pick and choose your 5-drops depending on what's relevant, right? If you want another princess trigger, and if you like find yourself struggling with how to balance your songs for dealing with evasives, then Jasmine, to add another tool to deal with evasives, is also very helpful too. She is 3/7, she hits evasives, and so these are all reasonable things to swap out for. For the 7-drops, right? So you could trial going to 4 Hades, right, and maybe dropping like a mob song or Down in New Orleans for that. You know, you could, you know, you could bring Vincenzo down and go to 18 uninkables. You could, you know, bring Vincenzo down, take Arthur to 2. There's a lot of ways you could play with this. I found this to be the perfect number, but that doesn't mean you can't toy around with kind of, you know, if you like the instant removal of Hades, if there's lots of warded characters in your area, you know, like 2 Arthurs, I think this is all very reasonable too. And then for like the specialist songs, right? So you could consider dropping like Dino or Mob to improve your consistency with 1 jump ahead. I found, you know, I'm kind of a believer that, like, you know, once you're at 4 TPOs and 4 sales, you know, there's a great article by Frank Karsten that kind of looks into the probability and likelihood of, you know, the added percentage gain of 1 jump ahead, you know, giving you like basically another like 2% likelihood that you'll get it in the first 14 cards. To me, like, when I tested it, it really felt no different. And I've had friends that have done like 1, even 2 1 jump aheads, and they still, you know, did not get ramp on turn 2. So to me, I'm like, this feels overcompensating and is just as likely to be a really bad top deck. Even with Ariel, right? Like, even with Ariel playing 1 jump ahead, it just doesn't feel good, even if you can Ariel trigger. And so, you know, I've opted to just, you know, if I'm going to get it, I'm going to get the turn 2 ramp. I'd rather not overcompensate. So that's why I don't do 1 jump ahead personally. And then one last hope, right, to help answer like 3-drop Phillips because it's warded. I think this is a good card. It's just kind of clunky. Like, really having the hero setup is legitimately awkward. And then, you know, the deck already has a lot of like hoping things will work out. So this just added a lot of clunkiness to that. And the fact that it's uninkable, you know, I just found Dino and Mob Song to have higher value. So that's why I went with them. So let's talk about mulligans, right? So on the blind, meaning you don't know what you're playing against, right? This is the general flow map of your priority in a hand, right? So you want to have turn 2 ramp. You must see a TPO or sale, right? This is priority number 1. Everything else bends to this. If you have one of those, the next thing you want is a Cinderella, right? If you have these 2 cards, right, then basically you just want inkables and a decent 6 cost. And ideally you want that 6 cost to be Ariel, unless you're playing against like green, purple aggro, or, you know, maybe even dogs, right? And those are situations where you may actually want Tinkerbell instead. And then, you know, you want, ideally, you don't have to have this in your opening hand, but ideally, you know, at least 1 draw engine. If, you know, and you want that to usually be Goliath. There's some hands where you keep it beyond the horizon. Not always. There's some hands you will. But usually, you know, if you see Goliath and you have everything else here, you know, you may just like keep that. So let's do some mulligan examples on the blind, right? So let's say we drew into these 7 cards. You know, we got our Sail, we got our Tipo, we got our Cinderella. To me, like, this is basically a perfect hand, right? We keep everything here. So, you know, we have the ideal turn 2 ramp play, which is, you know, the greedy line is Sail because it's drawing, it's maintaining a healthier hand and allows for the optimal like high roll play of Sail, Cinderella, Ariel, seeing down to New Orleans, and Ariel trigger. It gives you the exact cards to end with 8 ink, Cinderella, Ariel, and enough to play a 6 cost and to do an Ariel trigger. So you know, you kind of need Sail and not play a 1 drop to do that. Which is one of our strongest, like the deck's like strongest high roll. You know, and if you have 2, it's actually nice to keep both because Tipo or Sail is just nice to ink, right? So this is a card these are cards you kind of don't want to see later in the game, right? So if you see cards that you just, oh, you know, I really don't care to play this card. I want this card to be ink. I want this card to be a resource. I don't want to draw into this card later when I want like really strong cards, right? I love seeing this card early to ink early so that, you know, so I don't run into it later, right? So that's why if you have all the tools in your opening hand, you know, just keep the cards that you want to ink, right? So that's why you keep the Tipo if you already have Sail and you have Cinderella and everything else. So for like Mulan, right? She's inkable, early card on the play. If you kind of, again, like you're in the blind, so you don't know. So most cards, so I would just ink her. She'd be the first card I would ink, honestly. Or like, cause like I like to not give away that I've turned 2 ramp or like that I'm a blue deck quite yet. So I may ink Tipo or Sail like the next turn. But you know, like her value as ink is just higher if you're on the play and you don't know what you're playing against in most situations. And then if you're dealing with aggro, you know, you just deal with it, right? And then, you know, like, and with this hand specifically, I would actually keep down in New Orleans because, you know, it has a high chance of lining up to where you will end to be able to sing it, and it's your high roll. So, and again, Ariel is your ideal high roll play, right? And then, you know, you would play Goliath after you Ariel and then sing Dino with Ariel to get the trigger. So what about this hand, right? It's not a terrible hand, but it's not the hand we want either. So here I would keep the 2 ramps and I would send everything else, right? Now, in general, if you do not see a Cinderella or Kita in hand, but you see 2 turn 2 ramps, right? You see 2 sails or a Tipo and a sail, etc. Conventionally, you want to keep both of them because you still want enough additional inking to get you to a fast 5 or 6 drop to deploy your stabilizers to not lose the board, right? And if you don't find Kita or Cindy, then this will do it for you. It's going to be clunky, but it will allow that. And so you should keep both. Now, again, it's tempting here to keep Mulan to say like, hey, you know, I could play her, draw a card, discard a card, and hopefully find Cinderella. However, you know, the math kind of checks out that it's, you know, you're just as likely that's just 1 card. And so if you send Mulan, you know, it's kind of the same as, you know, as if you played her and drew a card, except now you're not 1 card down, right? And so, and then, you know, you're just as likely to draw into another Mulan, right? So now you're stuck with 2 Mulans and the value of her is kind of lost. And so, you know, you want to kind of be like, well, you know, if I draw into a Mulan, that's good because it's like 1 Mulan less that I'm going to draw into. And then 2, you know, like it's just better to kind of send her and hopefully get the card and treat sending her as drawing a card, right? So the rest of the cards are, you know, they're uninkable, they're clunky, they're not the cards you want to see in your opening line anyway. And so these are the cards you keep. So what about this hand? You know, this is a very easy decision. We send it all, right? Send it all. There is no turn 2 ramp. There's no sail. There's no Tipo. This is 7 cards, you know, to the deck. Now, again, it is tempting here to keep Mulan, to salvage this hand, quote unquote. But again, utilizing that same thought, you were like, you know, there's a likelihood that you could draw into another Mulan, right? Which makes the value of the Mulan you kept, it's just bad. It actually hurts you because that's 1 more card you could have sent to maybe find the cards you needed, right? And so you just hope that you draw into another Mulan if you really need her. But, you know, keeping her actually reduces the chance of finding one by 1 card. And so it's better just to send her. Okay, so what about this hand? It's kind of an interesting hand. On the play, blind. So I would keep Cinderella here, right? But I'd send everything else. Now there's a lot of different thoughts on hands like this, right? So there are people that will say, they will look at this hand, they say, oh, you send everything, send all 7. There's no turn 2 ramp, there's no sail, there's no Tipo. Now in my experience, if you miss getting the turn 2 ramp, very, you know, hurts a lot, right? And in some cases it's a game ending. But you know, in many games, even if you slowly get to Cinderella, right, and you play her 4 turns in, she alone will still be able to catapult your ink count to get you back in the game, right? She's still crucial to allowing you any sort of way to stabilize in the game. And so what would be the worst scenario is that you've sent this and you don't hit turn 2 ramp or Cinderella, right? And then you are truly like in a bad situation. And so in a hand like this, I would keep the Cindy as a still backup plan. And if you find the turn 2 ramp, then your ideal plan is kind of still in place. So what about if you're on the draw, right? It's almost the same rules, right? You know, you want your turn 2 ramp, you want your Cinderella, you want inkables, you want a good 6 cost. I'd say the only difference is that you stress less about having and keeping a draw engine like Goliath. You get 1 extra card. You know, you're spending a lot of the game responding, and you're just having more cards in your hand in general than your opponent usually. And so, you know, your draw engine will come when you need it, but you don't like desperately need it as much as if you're on the play. And then I'd say the only exception to that it would be I would often keep Akita if I am on the draw, because I don't know if I'm playing as a green build, and being on the draw against Emerald, Kita is actually like a really, really nice card to have. So on the draw into the blind, what do we have here? Again, this is essentially like a perfect hand. You know, we keep this, you know, we got our turn 2 ramps. We got Cinderella, we have great 6-drops, and we have inkable cards. And in fact, being on the draw, I'd keep the Bolt in many cases because, you know, if Cinderella lives, right, and you're able to sing with Cinderella, it actually gives you a great way to come back and fight for the board with Bolt, singing it after you played Cinderella. And so, you know, usually your hand is healthy enough on the draw that you can afford to keep this uninkable song. And then, you know, there's a fair likelihood that you'll be playing it actually. So again, we have the choice to pick between our Toon Tour ramps depending on what they do. And then we have our ideal turn 3 being Cinderella. And then we have 2 great 6 costs to kind of handle and be flexible with multiple situations, right? And so, what about this hand, right? And so on the draw, into the blind again. So on the draw, again, you know, we don't see our Cinderella or our Kita. We have our Sail and Tipo. So you keep your 2 turn 2 ramps. But, you know, being on the draw, in most situations, I would also probably keep the Tinkerbell because this kind of gives you a plan now, right? So you can, worst case scenario, play Sail, play Tipo, and get to Tinkerbell. And that, for most decks you'd play against, is the kind of a 6-drop you would want, right? So she kind of freezes the board in many cases and forces your opponent to kind of slow down a little bit. And so, you know, not knowing what you're playing into, I think keeping Tinkerbell Hill is very reasonable. All right, so here's an examples of a whole bunch of different mulligans that you may think about and kind of like play priority that you would want in multiple matchups on the play and on the draw. So purple steel. So I kind of like set up like a first few turns, like optimal lines, fledged from a mulligan that you may keep for multiple matchups, right? So purple steel, you usually want to like ideally end with Ariel and maybe like a Dino or a He Heralded Thunderbolt. So ramp, Cindy, Ariel. Blue-green, actually one of the most optimal lines that you can consider is Kita Cluck into a 7-drop. Now, with blue-green, it's very reasonable to do Cinderella on the play as well. But usually you want to do that if you have songs like Strength or Thunderbolt to get rid of a Clarabelle shift line. If you do not have songs, you want to do the Kita line because you expect a You're Welcome and you want to be able to basically not get punished for that. And Cinderella will be like, You're welcome. They're going to draw a bunch of cards to Clarabelle. So, you know, if you don't have songs to get rid of their shift lines, then what you should do is play the warded characters. And then yellow green, you know, you are, you know, you're playing your, you know, Cinderella to Tinkerbell line. And then in many cases, I'd actually try to keep Pluto as well. If you see Pluto and you know, end up knowing that you're against yellow green, because he's a central core plan and kind of making a comeback, but also getting rid of Chromicon. So against Sapphire Steel, right? You know, it's kind of clunky, right? You know, you just kind of do your ideal line on the play. I've actually found the Kita Cluck line is extremely frustrating for Sapphire Steel in the mirror. And so I actually, if I see that line on the draw, there's many times where I would pick that instead, right? Because Cinderella is just going to get banished if you're on the draw in many scenarios, which feels kind of bad. You know, red, purple, you know, you just Cindy Ariel. That's what you always want to do. And then Blurple, you know, many times Blurple will be drawing cards. They'll be maybe playing like Woodchucks, and Genies, blah, blah, blah. They'll be doing Sail. So actually playing fast Goliath is one of the worst things they can see because they have no real easy way of getting rid of Goliath by the time you've played him, right? And so, I mean, I've had Blurple players discard 5 cards to get down to 2 because they just have nothing to do with Goliath. And then on the draw, I really like the Kita Cluck line against them as well. But, you know, Cinderella isn't bad, but, you know, she's very likely to get removed with, like, Elsa. And so, you know, Kita Cluck, they just don't really have good answers for, and they kind of are stuck with, like, what do I do with this board for a long time? And then you kind of just get into an endgame battle. So what are the matchups sort of look like, right? So favorable matchups, in general, purple, right? And so Sonic Boom, like, just feasts on purple. Ariel just kind of really checks most valuable purple cards, right? And she just so efficiently deals with Amethyst that, you know, most of the builds kind of just fall before her, right? Purple Steel is, she's a particular specialist against. Red purple is practically a free matchup, assuming they don't get a perfect Hercules Demona line and you just kind of like, I don't know, had a horrible hand. And then yellow purple is also, you know, pretty good. Yellow purple is actually kind of great because, you know, they actually have like just no good removal against you. So it's one of the few matchups where you really get to like kind of keep your singers. And the only relevant removal against you is Elsa and Demona to exert you. But if they don't get to exert you before you're able to start singing against them, I mean, you kind of just run away with the game. Neutral, I'd say like blue matchups are very much skill matchups. So it's very dependent on the, you know, you piloting the build well and kind of them piloting against you. I'd say Blurple is very winnable. In fact, I'd argue I win most of my Blurple games, just due to the nature of like, you know, Ariel does great against purple. And you just have better removal than them if you plan it out correctly. Sapphire Steel, I actually feel that Ariel builds are superior into most Sapphire Steel builds. Allies particularly, like she just kind of feasts on. And then yellow blue, I'd say that like yellow blue is really weird because it's a little clunky for Ariel because their willpowers are so high. So the math sometimes doesn't check out in your favor. But then, you know, they're just like, I mean, Simba's playing so many free characters and then Hades is getting rid of Ariel. And so it's, so this can really actually be a harder matchup than you'd think if they get their ideal line. And then they actually can sometimes run a lot of warded characters too, which is really annoying. Still very winnable, right? But it's, you know, don't underestimate a good yellow blue player. The easy general rule is Emerald is hard, right? And so Emerald just kind of counteracts a lot of the benefit of Sapphire Steel in general. So, I mean, this is true for any Sapphire Steel build, not just Ariel. You know, like You're Welcome, Mother Knows Best. Like it takes the benefit of high willpower of Steel characters, just it makes them irrelevant, right? You just back to the deck, back to the hand. They also have high willpower, right? Emerald and Sapphire. And so, you know, you need to do a lot of work and math to get rid of their characters, but they don't have to do the same for you. So their removal is just more efficient. And, you know, they really punish you for playing a less amount of big characters, right? So like, you know, spending your whole turn playing one character because You're Welcome just gets rid of that easily. And then, you know, they have access to a very accessible inkable board wipe, being Prince Philip, Vanquisher of Foes, and Mean, Malicious, and Scary. And so that, again, that nullifies the benefit of high willpower. And so, so it's a matchup that their high roll is very, very hard to beat. On the draw, this is extremely on the play versus on the draw dependent. And if they're on the play and they get what they want, it's very, very hard to beat. And then even making comebacks against this deck is very, very hard. And so you kind of hope for their deck to kind of fall apart, which green-blue happens a fair amount. So you kind of hope the deck to beat itself. Green-purple feels like an almost unwinnable matchup if they open up with Webby and they kind of get that perfect string of like You're Welcomes and they're playing like Chromacons and drawing cards and they're just like discarding your hand with bends and stuff like that. There's a lot of different green-purple builds that are nightmares and none of them feel great. The only one that feels halfway reasonable is the green-purple low to the ground aggro burn build, right? With like the, you know, Inkcaster and Amethyst Chromacon and a bunch of like one drops and 2 drops. This actually is not too bad for Ariel at all. But like a lot of the like mid-range and control builds are very, very, very hard. And then I'd say dogs. So yellow-green dogs is definitely winnable. You know, maybe this is more appropriate for neutral, right? But I'd say that like because they run a lot of Ursula and Mowgli's and Snipe songs a lot, it's actually a very frustrating and annoying matchup. So, you know, you end up top decking or putting yourself in vulnerable positions more than most other matchups because you're sort of forced to ink your songs early to eliminate their Ursula and Mowgli value. And if it's a best of 3, they kind of know now that you're a song heavy build and they'll prioritize cards like that. And then, you know, if they get a well-timed Chromacon and you don't find your Pluto, you know, Chromacon kind of just counters, it takes the efficiency of Ariel and throws it back at you. And so, so this can be a challenging matchup, but you definitely have the tools to deal with it and you definitely can win in overwhelming fashion. But in like a best of 3 format, it can definitely be trickier as they kind of know exactly how to make their hand to counter songs specifically. So let's talk about like what some play lines would look like, right? And let's map that out for you guys. So, you know, I'm going to assume, so these are going to be on the play. On the draw is just such a different conversation. And there's so much like if-thens with on the draw that I think it's just kind of beyond the scope of this video to really like belabor that too much. So we're going to focus more on the play and kind of like what Like you're dictating the pace of the game, what you would be wanting to do, what you'd be wanting to watch for, and how you would play out your turns specifically. So we're going to do 2 matchups. We're going to do full spectrums, purple, steel, and green, blue. These are very large parts of the meta and cover different spectrums of the deck. And so, so turn 1, the ideal turn, we would just ink a card and we pass, right? They would very commonly, right? So we're going to give them a lot of their high roll here. So they very commonly would play like Captain Hook, pass, right? So our high roll ideally would be sail the Azurite Sea, draw a card, ink a card, go to 3. They'd play a Calhoun, very commonly. We are playing Cinderella. They play Cheshire Cat, so they now have this very strong board, right? This is a board that just wants to just destroy things. So how are we going to handle this? So again, we have our dream line here. So Cinderella, right? We went to 5, we inked to 6, we play Ariel. Now, it's very tempting here. It's very, very tempting here to sing a song and get rid of something with Cinderella. My general recommendation is to hold, right? Because again, right, you want to set up singing turns where you're getting Ariel triggers and maximizing value. And 2, you're trying to lose as little singers as possible, right? For the situation. So if Cinderella sings here, she will get banished the next turn. And and you're only going to get rid of 1 character, you're not going to get the value out of the additional songs that you want, right? And so, sometimes it's hard to see this, but my recommendation would be to not sing yet. So they get Genie, right? So this is like the dream line for Purple Steel. This is like what they almost always want to see, right? Now, a few things can happen here. If Purple Steel does not have Strength of a Raging Fire, which they almost always do, they almost always will hold and mulligan for that, for at least 1. If they have no strength from Purple Steel here, and they can't or don't take out Cinderella, you've just won the game. You've effectively won the game. I have never lost a game where I get this line and they don't strength Cindy, and it's just game over. So what next turn? There's a lot of different ways you could play next turn. I'm going to give you like the highest of high rolls here. So in general, right, you want to, when you are selecting targets for singing songs, right, you want to get rid of threats, not aggro lines quite yet. You want to stabilize the board so that when your singers sing, right, they are staying alive. And so here, like the craziest high roll would be that you play Goliath from your hand, you ink a card, you're at 8 ink now, so you have 2 ink remaining. You use Ariel to sing down to New Orleans. And this is what I consider the deck's strongest high roll. You spit out Tinkerbell. She now splashes 1 damage on the entire enemy board. And then now with the Ariel trigger from down to New Orleans, you do 3 damage. You finish off Cheshire Cat, right? You now have no hand. You draw 2 from Goliath. And if you draw into a Strength or a Thunderbolt, you've won the game, right? Because next turn, they're probably not gonna, I mean, if they challenged into Ariel next turn, what are they going to challenge with? Like Calhoun, Captain Hook, and Genie, they would lose their entire board. They would lose their entire board trying to get rid of Ariel because the 1 damage Tinkerbell did. And then, they just lose the game, right? But if they stay readied, right, Ariel continues to demolish them and Tinkerbell is her bodyguard. Watching over her, right? And so this is a line where it's like, there's effectively no coming back for them and they just lose. And then, the beautiful follow-up after this is that you play Vincenzo, then you sing another song and you just keep going and you laugh. So what if they do have strength, right? This kind of changes the state of the game a little bit, right? And this is actually very common. So you kind of have to almost plan for this, right? Then, what's important here is that, you kind of have to just continue to curve out, right? And that's okay. So you play Vincenzo, right? And you can just take out Calhoun. And then they could Elsa here, right? Now, if they Elsa and they want to take out Ariel, right? It'd be very expensive. And they'd have to essentially, risk losing almost their entire board. The other thing that we could then consider, so usually what they'll do is they'll maybe like go wider, play other characters. What was I saying? Go wider, play other characters. And then, most commonly like Vincenzo and Ariel will survive. I'd also recommend here that like there is a reasonable justification for Ariel to just to sing a song here and play a 6-drop instead of the Vincenzo, right? And eliminating like if you played he hurled his Thunderbolt instead of Dino, right? He hurled his Thunderbolt and then take out Cheshire Cat and then trigger to take out Calhoun. That would have been reasonable as well. I think Vincenzo here is the conservative safe line, right? Because let's say next turn if they have like a he hurled his Thunderbolt and Elsa, you know, you kind of lose 2 singers in a row, but now they're like basically empty-handed. They would have to have a pretty crazy hand to have that. But if you're already losing a singer, you have to plan for you might lose your other singer, right? And so Vincenzo allows you a follow-up plan if Ariel somehow dies. But, you know, if Vincenzo lives, right, you can also just win the game. You can play Tinkerbell, you can sing Mob Song, you can sing He Held His Thunderbolt. There's a million things you could do. Another line you could do is that, you know, you could play, you could play Namari. You could play Hero's Thunderbolt, right? You could just sing 2 songs, right? So you could sing Dino and spit out a free Goliath, do the Ariel trigger. You could sing, and then you could hard cast Hero's Thunderbolt, take out Cheshire Cat, right? There's a million ways to play this turn, even if Cinderella got banished in the process, because Ariel just opens up so many different opportunities with that trigger to kind of keep gaining the board, making extra swings. And so, you know, these are just examples of if Cinderella gets strength, you know, what are some things that you could consider? So what about green blue, right? This is the hard matchup. So again, we're going to ink. They're probably going to play Clarabelle. We're both going to ramp. So a key concept you need to understand is that blue green is a war of singers, right? Blue green is a tough matchup, even on the play, right? And if you miss relevant removal at any point, you have just as much of a chance of losing this game. And so I'm going to show like an example of how Knife's Edge this game can look, right? So if you play Cinderella, they play Donald Duck. This is one of the ideal things they want to do against Sapphire Steel because Donald Duck is like so hard to get rid of. He's got 5 willpower, so that means Thunderbolt does not get rid of him. So you'd have to play like 2 cards to get rid of Donald, which feels terrible with the amount of ink you have right now, which is going to 6. And you know, he's like basically establishes like a guaranteed you're welcome singer, right? To set up for a Clarabelle shift to draw a bunch of cards. So understanding this, right? You know that they are going to 5 ink the next turn. They're ramping slower than you because you played Cindy. They might also play Cindy here too, but I'd say most situations they would play Donald Duck because they want to survive a Thunderbolt. And so what do you do here, right? Well, you have to get rid of the shift target. So you would place Ariel next turn, and then you would, with Cinderella, sing Strength of Raging Fire or Thunderbolt, you know, whatever. And you get rid of the shift line, right? So now he's stuck at 5 ink. What does he do, right? So maybe he plays his own Cinderella to try to catch up to you in ink, right? Try to match you. And then with Donald, sing You're Welcome, which puts him a little low on cards, but it is what it is. He's drawing with Donald. He's on the draw. He's a little bit more cards. So he sends Ariel like back to the deck, right? You drew some cards, but now you're left with only Cinderella again. And now he's got Donald and Cinderella, right? So how do we deal with this? So now, right, Hades comes down because you're at 7 ink. You get rid of Donald. He held his Thunderbolt with Cinderella, right? You get rid of his Cinderella, right? He has no cards on board now. So he has to raw cast his Clarabelle. Maybe he draws 1 or 2 cards, right? Maybe he draws nothing, right? Because he's spent so much, he's not actually going to deploy a lot of his cards. And then next turn, you can play your Ariel, right? And with Hades, right? Again, you want to end your lines with some sort of draw. So maybe you've been holding onto Beyond the Horizon. With Hades, you sing Beyond the Horizon, with Hades, you sing Beyond the Horizon. Do 3 damage from Ariel trigger. Maybe you draw into a strength and you get rid of Clarabelle, right? Or maybe you had Clarabelle, or you had strength and beyond. You sing strength with Cindy, and then get rid of Clarabelle, and then you Beyond the Horizon and refill your hand, right? And so, but you see how like you want to really prioritize. Do not let them sing ever. Do not let them hold a singer ever, because as soon as you do, you just lose the game. You just lose control of the game so much. And similarly to them, that's their same priority, right? They want to sing away your singers, because once they gain control of that board and you're not able to sing in retaliation, it's just such a snowball effect from them. Because this game could have easily been they you're welcome away your Cinderella. They play Clarabelle. They draw 6 cards, and then it's effectively game over. If you were on the draw. So let's do another line here, right? So we're gonna give another on the play line against blue green, where we're gonna play Kita instead, right? And let's say that we didn't see Sail. Let's say we saw Tipo, right? So we're a little less cards in our hand. So they would go Clarabelle. So they've put us in a tough situation here. They have 2 shift lines, meaning that they've almost guaranteed that they will be able to shift on 5 ink, right? And so, because if you get rid of one, you know, 1 remains. And I mean, you could like sing 2 removal songs, like hard cast 1 and sing the other, but that feels terrible. And the likelihood of you having that in your hand is actually pretty low. So we kind of say like, all right, fine, you're going to get the shift line. It is what it is, right? And so we're going to play Cluck. We're going to use Kita's trigger. We're going to go up to 6 ink here. So with their 1 drop, they're going to shift, because with Clarabelle 3 drop, they could still sing Mean Malicious. They could still sing Mother Knows Best. They kind of want to keep her there, right? And so here, now what they could do is use Clarabelle to sing You're Welcome onto the Tipo. Now, it doesn't feel like the most value play, though, right? Because you have 2 characters on board, and they know, right, that if they do that, there's an extremely high chance that Clarabelle could die, and or that you could sing Beyond the Horizon, right? Because you have 2 singers that they cannot interact with. So it's like, well, this is a curious situation. So maybe they hold the Clarabelle, to kind of, but they still draw a couple cards, right? Because, you know, and so now, next turn you play Hades, right? And then you use Strength with Cluck, get rid of Clarabelle. Maybe they Hades your Hades next. And then here, right, Ariel, you use Cluck and Tipo, you sing Beyond the Horizon, you get an Ariel trigger. And then with Kita, you can sing Strength. Maybe you draw into that, you get rid of Hades, and then you continue on. And you kind of see, like, again, it's the War of Singers. It just looks a little different. But, you know, with your warded characters, they just can't really be touched. And then giving you guaranteed singers is extremely beneficial. So, in conclusion, right, Sonic Boom is super fun. It's powerful. It's versatile. It's strong into a wide field, especially a field that's intense with purple, amethyst. It's complex. It's very satisfying when you get to pull off what you want to do. It's unique, it's surprising, and it's often very much underestimated, right? People will learn to respect Ariel very fast. And honestly, it just comes with a great cast of characters. You know, you play with some great classic princesses, and they're all just gorgeously crafted cards. And so yeah, you know, what's the downside, really? I hope you guys really enjoyed this video. Again, I know this was long. This was a pretty... there's a lot I wanted to talk about. This is, you know, this is like 2.5 months of just hard, dedicated testing and the culmination of my final list. And this is the list that I'm going to champion into set champs. So I don't anticipate any real changes. I've kind of decided this is what I'm going to lock in. And then, yeah, so I hope you guys really enjoy it. It's a blast to learn. It's a blast to play. And I'm hoping that it only just continues to get better. You know, my goal is to take a very similar deck into set 11, but we'll have to see what new tools we get. So yeah, hope you guys all have a great day. Enjoyed the video. Like, share, subscribe, comment. Let me know your feedback. Let me know how you do if you play this list. I'd love to hear about it. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Take it easy, and may you be blessed. Peace.